Good morning, MP.
Good morning.
Didn't you hear me say good morning, beautiful? And I could not be speaking to Steve or
And I
Richard.
answered.
I could not be speaking to Steve and or Richard Raghubarsingh.
I apologize. Good morning. How are you all?
Morning, dear. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Let's say happy belated birthday going out to Daddy, whose birthday was yesterday.
Yes, my dad's
So
birthday
happy
was
belated birthday to Mr. Haynes. I was expecting cake and ice cream outside the office when I walked in this morning. I didn't see any. I guess it's delayed with the traffic.
Anita, nobody can beg for cake and ice cream like Steve can.
Beg for any food.
Steve can.
Beg for any food. Good morning, my dear. Would you like to answer a question this morning?
About the Auditor General and the investigation.
Yeah, your colleague on the opposition bench in the House has suggested the TTPS should begin an investigation of the 2023 public accounts. Do you agree with that?
I believe that an investigation is required. Usually with a criminal investigation, you have to meet certain parameters to trigger an investigation. But while we are looking into it, there's certainly room for concern with how the accounts are being handled at this time. So police, certainly with in the fullness of time, once you look at all of the elements at play, but there is room for an investigation, I will say that.
Right. Do you consider yourself a dissident? You've been described as such by many, and the papers have picked it up with you and four other colleagues of yours.
I do. I mean, what am I being accused of dissenting to? So that has been my question across the board, because when I spoke out, and the one statement that I would have made was that I believe the internal election should be called within the quickest possible fashion so that we can deal with our internal matters, we can strengthen and fortify our party, because if you want to deliver transformative, progressive governance, you have to begin at home. So you have to do that within your political organization. And as far as I'm aware, the political leader has stated categorically that the elections will be held when they are constitutionally due. So in my mind, the only persons who could be accused of being dissidents are persons who disagree that elections ought not to, or people who think that elections ought not to be held. So, I've seen it, but I mean, nobody's been able to answer the question as to what are we dissenting to. And so, because there seems to be an agreement, and it seems to be that there's a settled fact that the elections will take place. And then everything else that has happened since then, I think, has been an attempt to complicate a very simple issue, which is
Mr. Peter Kanhai is quoted in one of the newspapers today saying the election is due, or this executive expires on June 26th.
Right.
I don't know what that means in terms of the machinery of the UNC's internal mechanisms to announce the date, and if there are time frames within which when this executive expires for an election date to be called and or an election process to begin. Can you update us on what that usually is?
Right. So the Constitution of the United National Congress gives a good amount of power to the national executive to make certain decisions. You would have to, at the expiration of the current national executive, you would have to trigger the internal election. So you have about 5 weeks. Now you can do it before, which is an issue that I've raised both internally and externally in terms of the national public, a question of fixed election dates. I believe that the only benefit that the incumbents should have, or the only advantage incumbents should have, should be their performance and not the idea of having election dates in your back pocket. And so that you, the executive can expire and then have the election triggered. But the executive can also call a Congress and do things to postpone the elections. And there are a number of ways around it. But that is why a call was issued to ensure that the internal elections will be happening as they are constitutionally due. So we hope that within the 5 weeks from June, before June 26th, we'll have some indication as to when the date will be called. Because you see, that gives our membership, it gives our persons who are interested in participating, whether they are going to put their hands up for an executive position, whether they are just interested in hearing what persons have to say, whether they're interested in voting, it gives them ample time to prepare themselves so that they are ready to participate fully in the internal mechanisms. And so I would advocate for that the calling of the date beyond this tight stipulation so that we'll give our membership, because I mean we are all on the same team. So it's a question of giving our membership.
Are you all on the same team?
Well, yeah, the United National Congress has certain inbuilt values. You have certain, we have a commitment to good governance. We have a commitment from the party's mandate to deliver equitable and transformative governance. It is listed in the aims and the objectives of the party. And so the disagreement would not be on those aims and objectives, it would be on the execution of same. And maybe some persons have decided that they prefer a different path, and that's fine. That is all part and parcel of being part of an organization. But you ought to be able to find a way to discuss those differences and then move forward, because the aims and objectives of the organization remain the same, and the membership gets to decide whose path to delivering those aims and objectives are the ones that you would sign on to by way of your vote. And so, yeah, same team, maybe different decisions on how to proceed forward.
Anita, has the internal elections been postponed by the national executive at a general meeting before? Is there precedent for that?
Mrs. Prasad-Bissessar, to her credit, has been very good at sticking with the ensuring that our executive that our membership, has a say. So to her credit, the elections have been held. What we've seen happening, though, is that the framers of our constitution would have, in their wisdom, put the national executives to take place every 2 years, and the position of political leader every 3 years. I believe it is to create a sort of check so that the executive is not necessarily an executive that is beholden to a political leader, that the executive is beholden to the members. That's the way it ought to operate. What we've seen happening, though, is that there has been moves to either move up the political leader position so that the entire slate runs. So it is political leader, deputy political leaders, etc. come down. So that is the only thing that we've seen. But like I said, to her credit, Mrs. Prasad-Bissessar has held internal elections when they are due.
So there's nothing to suggest that it would not happen then as constitutionally due this year.
Pardon? What was that? Sorry?
So there's nothing to suggest that this year will be any different.
Well, prior to the calls being made, there was a certain narrative being put forward to the public that we are in preparation for general elections and that we must stay focused on general elections. And therefore, the message had to be also included that we can, in fact, satisfy our constitutional mandates while preparing for general elections. Those things can exist at the same time, because in the execution of an internal election, it gives you, all of us, an opportunity to go to our membership to say this is how we intend to govern the party and therefore govern the country. I mean, Trinidad and Tobago is in that space. Next year is 2025. We've seen lower voter turnouts over time. Those of us, you must know it. There's a frustrated society. There's a sense that politics is not catered to people, that it is not, that we don't discuss things that matter to the average citizen, and that we are, ensconced in our ivory towers, and that we don't hear the cries of persons. And so I think it is important, it is imperative on all political organizations, all political players, to deliver the type of transformative politics that will get persons interested, willing to participate, because that is the only way we'll get the country that we hope to see. And so the way I can do that is by encouraging it in my own political organization, by saying, let us ensure robust conversation. Let us not be afraid of disagreement, but let us come to a consensus on how do you build the party and therefore build the country, because that is extremely important. We are facing issues. I mean, Paul and I in our parliamentary duties would have gone to a workshop on data and what it means in policy making. We are at a space where we can't be trifling with issues that can so significantly affect our population that we could be set backwards by decades. And so for me, this is a really important space. I take it as my personal duty as somebody who entered politics to say that we all can do better. And one way of doing that is maturing our political process. It is in saying that political parties ought to be able to show the population how they will improve their organization, improve the governance of their organization, because that is how you'll show you are prepared to govern the entire country. And
all of that is philosophically wonderful in terms of how party politics should be and governance should be. But of course, you're in a Trinidad and Tobago space where politicians can sometimes be petty and vindictive, and there are repercussions for when you step out of the line. So is it that you are confident that the UNC is progressive enough in terms of moving forward beyond this dissident narrative, or do you think petty and vindictive politics will play and lead to certain consequences for the so-called dissidents?
Well, I am confident in my ability to be a good communicator. And so therefore, I hope that as I go, because I'm not just delivering the message over air, so, over the TV and radio stations and whatnot. I'm delivering the message within communities as well. And so, I mean, politics is meant to be persuasive. If it is that the population is not ready for this type of politics, they'll say so, and I'll have to accept that. But in accepting the decision of the population, you ought not to dissuade yourself from trying, right? I mean, so I have a platform. I believe in something very strongly, and I believe in something that would both develop the organization I'm a part of, as well as my nation. And so it is imperative on me to deliver the message. So we'll see. The only way to test is at the polls. The way you test this is at the polls. Persons will have their say, and we have to respect that. But you certainly have to try.
Well, if you get a chance to face the polls, but before I even go into that, because it follows some Richard's question, following from one of the statements you made earlier on, do you think there's a conflict to do, or is there a concern from on your part from the?
My parents own a Chinese restaurant.
Okay, somebody has an audio device on. Do you see a conflict, or is there a concern that there had been a call for persons wishing to submit themselves for nomination for constituencies for the general election, even before a date for the internal election has been named, or that process triggered, as you indicated earlier on? Is there a conflict there or concern? Is there a precedent for that?
I think that was also part of the rationale behind making a call early on, because certainly if the screening committee comes from the national executive, and we've all agreed that the executive will expire in June of this year, it would be illogical to set up a screening committee in May and have those persons screen persons between May and June and then expire. Their term in office expires. It would be certainly procedurally the best thing to trigger the internal elections. An executive with a new mandate selects the team going forward in 2025. And so, we wait to see what occurs with that. But I think our position, certainly my position, has been clear that the logical sequence of events would be to allow members, the UNC members, to have their say in terms of who governs us internally, and then those persons with that mandate select a team that goes forward to present our message nationally.
Now, last Friday, yourself, you had a personal emergency. You stated that in advance, and 4 others of your colleagues were absent from the parliament. And there was a vote, which the government was able to be successful in their moving of. There's a lot of narrative coming out of that quote unquote, you all broke beach. There was suggestions that there was collusion among the 5 to stay with us to make a statement because you're being called dissidents as a collective.
Yes.
Would you like to clear the air on that from your perspective on the record now?
Yes, certainly. I would have had to issue a press release. In terms of my political career, I think that has been one of the more difficult spaces that I've been in. Just given that the idea that publicly within my own political organization at our anniversary function, there would be a space to use that as a space to suggest some sort of sinister intent when no such thing existed, put me in a really uncomfortable position where I had to address something publicly. Because since making my call for internal elections, I'm sure you would have seen it, various persons would have said different things, and I've chosen not to respond because I really don't feel that it is beneficial. I don't think it adds to the progressive level of politics that I'm seeking to bring forward to the population. But on this one occasion, I thought it was, I felt it important to state that you really ought not to be so willing, even in internal politics, to suggest to persons that people will abandon their duty to country because of internal matters. That's a simple communication would have let you know. I mean, 2 weeks before this, 2 weeks, just the 2 Fridays before, we had a special majority vote that the government required 2/3 of the persons to pass. And everybody in the House voted along with our whip because the discussion had taken place and there was an agreement. And so then to come 2 weeks later and suggest it, I thought it was just a matter of political convenience. So just to be clear, I would never abandon my duties. There are more effective, certainly more efficient ways to send a message, which I have no problem employing. And so where I took issue was the implication of some sort of sinister intent. And so I believe that it has been cleared up. I hope that we can all now move on and deal with the serious matters because it was an unfortunate incident. I had to clear the air, which I think I did quite effectively. And now we can go on with the business of the day. And I really hope that as we go forward conducting our internal business, that we adopt a stance that we can put policy over propaganda, that persons can hear from us what we intend to deliver that will create a different result in 2025. How do we intend to strengthen our institution? How do we intend to widen our membership? How do we get people more interested in politics as a whole and UNC politics in particular, because we are UNC members? And those
but while you've cleared the air, Anita, sorry to interrupt, while you've cleared the air, one, you would imagine in the political space we're in now, nationally and in terms of the individual parties, and particularly 2 major parties, given that there had been a particular narrative leading up, and yourself and the 4 other members who were absent on Friday have been very vocal in your call for internal elections, it did seem odd or coincidental, some may put it, that all 5 of you were absent on that day. You would imagine how that could trigger some sort of suspicions.
Yeah, here's the thing. Just to be clear, only 2 of us were absent, right? Okay. I sought leave, and Dr. Rai Ragbir had, his son's graduation, which again is really easy to clear. You knew where he was, right? Then you had, if you looked on at the setting, because it was private members day, which ends usually at 6 p.m. The House adjourns, we know this, right? During the private members day, while Mrs. Prasad-Bisasa was on her legs, you can clearly see Rodney Charles in his seat supporting Mrs. Prasad-Bisasa. What occurred is there was a move by the government to extend private members day beyond 6 p.m. If you look on at the sit-in, you see the chief whip object to this, right? You hear Mrs. Pasambisa in her contribution post 6 p.m. saying, none of us expected to be here at this time. And so I think Rodney would have cleared the air on that he just did not know that this debate was going to take place. So he left just before 6 p.m. And and therefore again, this implication of some sort of sinister intent. But he was in the house. I mean, you could have seen him.
So is it an internal communication thing with the UNC MPs about what the process was and that there be the extension, the proposed extension?
And that was all that it was. It was an internal communication space that led to certain people not being there. And then using that, right, you created a narrative the following Sunday, and a narrative that I thought you used the time being the party's anniversary to create the space, and then in the few days following, because yesterday I did some media on, I'm sorry, Tuesday I did some media on it, which was April 30th, which was the party's actual anniversary. All of the things gets lost in this conversation on attendance, which I really went at pains during my press release to point out that it was a simple majority vote. Everybody knows that in a simple majority vote, because the benefit of winning an election is that you hold the majority of the seats in the House, and therefore you will not bring a vote for simple majority if you don't think you can win it, because you have the numbers too. So I mean, I thought it was like, again, it has created a conversation that draws itself away from actual issues facing us, national issues and internal issues that can be properly ventilated, that can be responsibly ventilated. And again, that's why I urged in my press release that until you call an election date, we should absent ourselves from doing this type of campaigning on UNC platforms. There's a way to do it, and there's a proper way to do it, and we should really commit ourselves to the proper way to doing things.
How do you think, we spoke to political analyst Rishi Maharaj yesterday, who shared the view that he thought this was hurting brand UNC, this conflict between 5 persons and others, and and the press conferences and the press releases and the accusations that you're having to defend yourselves, when, as you say, there are more significant national issues in front of the country.
So the population got to know me as the public relations officer for the United National Congress. I have a particular commitment and affection for brand UNC. And so you would always see me conducting myself in a manner that will really try to shield the brand from any sort of from being hurt. Because I do believe the UNC is a strong political vehicle. And so that is why I continue to urge persons that let us practice mature politics, so that going forward, yes, we know the internal elections are constitutionally due, and therefore they will happen. There is a way to campaign that is responsible, that is policy-based, that tells people within the UNC what they can expect that is better, what they can expect that is improved, what they can expect that is progressive, that is transformative. That should be the type of campaigning. Because other than that, you will turn people off. And so, like I said, I found myself in an extremely unfortunate situation where I had to publicly respond because the accusation was publicly made. And so hopefully we can all find a way to improve what we are putting to the public and certainly to our UNC members, because that is also very important to me.
Is this a difficult time for you? Because to me, you've had a stellar political career since your debut on the scene. I worked with you in the Senate. Yes. I think, my opinion is that you're respected by your colleagues in the UNC. You're respected across the floor because of your communication style. I think you're respected on a national scale. I think you have a high likability factor. And so is this a difficult time for you, personally and politically, or is this something you see that just part of the course?
No, I see it as a necessary time for me. I entered the political landscape. And I have, like I said before, I have been very consistent with my politics. I've been very consistent on what I hope to deliver nationally and why I believe the UNC is the space to allow us to deliver something that is really transformative nationally. I think that, I entered in 2017. I was 30 years old at the time. And, this nation, my home country, is extremely, extremely important to me. And so, therefore, you have to use whatever platform you have to create, you have to, wherever you stand, it is your duty to improve that. That is how you get the country you want. You don't, this idea of, I am in the UNC and I'm always looking to say this should be better, this should be done differently, this should be done differently, and then I'm doing nothing to improve my organization, then there's some level of hypocrisy in that. And so I see it as necessary, I see it as a required time, and so I'm going to try to execute it to the best of my ability. And the hope is that the population will be receptive, the majority of the population will be receptive, because I can tell you, the messages coming to me is that people understand exactly what needs to be done and why it needs to be done. And so that they understand that it is not simply, we cannot enter 2025 election year and it be the same type of campaigning and the same type of politics that we've seen in the past, because you will get persons much more disinterested, people within my own age group aren't even willing to participate in the political process because they are so turned off by it. So I see it as necessary. And with any in any process, when you have to bring about some sort of change, some sort of improvement, it is going to be difficult. So yes, it is difficult, but it is necessary.
Do you think this will hurt your chances in the screening committee? You said you're willing to face whatever consequences you coming away from speaking out. I saw that quoted in the newspaper. Do you think this may have an impact on your chances at the screening committee?
Well, I mean, that would really heavily depend on what screening committee I face, right? So that if the internal elections take place and the internal elections take place, and then a screening committee is constituted from the persons who've received a mandate. Well, and so that's a difficult question to answer. I mean, if the screening committee is tomorrow, well then absolutely. But as it really depends on what screening committee I face. But I will say this though, and people will have asked, well, why would you do that? Because I think it's also important to show persons that you can call for something. I've heard questions about, why aren't you towing the party line? The party line, the party's constitution requires election to take place this year. That is in fact the party line. So to do anything contrary to that is what will not be towing the party line. And so, you get into this space where persons will have, whatever opinions they have. I will communicate my message wherever I have the opportunity to communicate my message, and then we go forward from there. But when I say I'm prepared to face any consequences, and I make it clear, there are also consequences to inaction. There are also consequences to remaining silent. So regardless of what you did and you didn't do, there would be a consequence. And so you have to be prepared anyway.
Yeah. And that's a very good point, actually.
Tell me about it.
That's a very good point, that there's a consequence to inaction. And oftentimes in a small space, many times people don't want to rock the boat, so to speak. And politics is even a smaller space because it's a microcosm of the country where you have all sorts of egos at play. And sometimes you just have to stand up for what is right. And of course, now the political graveyard is littered with people who have stood up for what they believed in. And well, let's see whether Trinidad and Tobago is in a new space. But I totally take that point, that because of your sense of integrity, sometimes you are going to stand up and say certain things, and you feel motivated to stand by your principle of how you see something, and you should not lose that.
I don't know, Richard, if you remember, when I was very early on the political scene, I came onto Power 1 or 2. There was a conversation about how persons coming into. You told me all of it. Everybody's the same. You come in here and people, you come into it and everybody stands within their party and nobody thinks about the country. And I hope that in 2024 you see that what I told you in 2017, I was in fact telling you the truth. So some of us are.
It would be remiss of us to have you on this morning and not ask your opinion on the present imbroglio between the Auditor General's office and the Attorney General / Ministry of Finance. What do you think about this development and how it's playing out in the public?
And you see how it's playing out in the public. I think we in the UNC certainly can see it, that you cannot use your executive office to then control the voices of persons who are meant to maintain the checks and balances within our society. And so that the Auditor General is an independent institution. It is meant as a check on our executive power, and that doesn't matter who holds the position. It is a space of comfort for the people of Trinidad and Tobago that there are persons guarding the guards. And so therefore, the persons who are in charge cannot now try to threaten and bully and create a space where that is uncomfortable for independent institutions. And I think that has lessons for all of us.
She has said that her office, and this is quoted in the newspaper yesterday, is under, quote unquote, under political attack. Do you think that's a fair statement?
Certainly from the conduct of the government in the parliament, and that's what we can see. It appears that the language is also that of an attack, and so I can only imagine what we cannot see.
And that's a good point, because we all know
you're conducting yourself publicly in full view of the public. Can you imagine what is going on, and we're not seeing it
behind the scenes?
Well, the persons who are in the know, we spoke to Mariana Brown earlier in the week, and persons who have held that office off and online have said that the Auditor General acted within the ambits of the law. There are deadlines. There were overtures from the Ministry of Finance to supply additional information that they say would have corrected what they describe as an understatement of the national public accounts to the tune of about $3 billion. It has evolved that, the overtures were refused at first, and then eventually a pre-action protocol that was sent by the Office of the AG, or could be on behalf of the Ministry of Finance, and it was accepted. It was first said that the Auditor General did not look at the additional information. The Auditor General has said that is an incorrect statement. I did, but did not see substantiating documents to support all of the $3 billion. I asked a direct question to the Minister of Finance on, I think it was Monday, asking about if there were documents to substantiate this $3 billion so that the Auditor General would have had to seriously take it into consideration, because that's a job. Somebody can't say, it had $2,000 extra there, just put it in. She has to see substantiating documents. That's a job. But that's the job of the division. He said, the Minister of Finance, you can correct me if I'm wrong, he was unaware of if there were substantiating documents. So it's interesting
that he was unaware, but still managed to make all of these public statements suggesting that, there were to indicate some sort of non-compliance or some sinister motive. And that's what I said, you cannot use your executive position to intimidate independent institutions. They were set up for a reason. There's a job to be done. And I want to publicly congratulate her for her stance and her courage, because it is very difficult to stand up in the face of some of these, when you see an Attorney General, Minister of Finance, and then the full might of the government coming towards you. And so that is what we require across the board. Persons who, wherever you are, what position you hold, stand up for the right thing, and we'll get the better country.
There's something that's not being said here. That very often there are questions about the validity of parts of the Constitution. And to me, the framers of our Constitution need to be congratulated here, because clearly the forethought that went into the setting up of divisions like the Auditor General's office and the specific timelines involved and the protections or the insulation from potential influence are playing out as having a lot of credibility in this case to me.
And you know, we've seen in the past, whenever an independent institution somehow does not fall in line with what the government believes they ought to, there is this process of vilification of the problem is the institution. And that there's a problem with the institution. And that has been something that we flagged time and time again. You've seen it with the Police Service Commission. You've seen it across the board. And so that idea of using executive power, using your platforms to try to undermine public confidence in independent institutions, again, I really have to congratulate the Auditor General for not, trying for how she's handled this thus far, because this is the reason it is getting the public attention that it has right now, and she has to be publicly congratulated.
What should happen next? Because at the end of the day, X will say the right and Y will say the right. But in the public domain, it's another example of a bacchanal, a confusion. You understand?
Yes.
At the end of the day, the Auditor General will have the right constitutionally to stand her ground, or based on information that may be sent from the Ministry of Finance or the Treasury Department, right, to amend or maintain the report that she has initially sent to the Parliament,
right,
which is yet to be. The Minister of Finance has said he has until, I think, May 23rd to late, according to law, right?
Yes.
What should happen in your opinion? Because this needs to be settled in the public interest.
Correct.
On behalf of the public interest.
Correct.
And we move away from the bacchanal and the confusion, and he say, she say, I say, you say, pre-action 1, pre-action 2, pre-action response, pre-action this and that. And no offense, Ragabassing, lawyers making more money. You understand? As is wont to happen in this country very often. What should happen next in the situation in the interest of Trinidad and Tobago?
The Auditor General and that department should be allowed the full space to do their job as an independent institution, because they are there to do their job to safeguard our own, democracy. So I think they should be allowed the full space to do their job, and that the government really needs to stop its interference, no overreach on the government's part.
Interesting. It just gets tiring sometimes, It gets very, very tiring. And how are your constituents responding to the situation regarding you? And since this started, has there been a one-on-one conversation going back to the so-called dissident issue? Has there been a one-on-one conversation between yourself and Mrs. Pasabi-Sessa at all?
No, there's been no one-on-one conversation between myself and Mrs. Pasabi-Sessa. As for my constituents, so before I spoke out publicly, because it was a UNC matter, I consulted with my UNC Tabaquite constituency executive. So I'm the member of parliament duly elected to take care of all the constituents in Tabaquite. But there's a UNC arm within the constituency that looks after our membership, ensures that the membership has their say, etc. And so I did consult with my Tabaquite constituency executive. The space that we're in here within our constituencies, that we understand that we have the infrastructural concerns, we have concerns with the deliverance of basic service, water, etc. And that the way that I can most effectively try to get some solutions to these issues is if we can hold the executive position, we can hold government, because that is how, members of parliament, opposition members of parliament are advocates, representatives, but the execution arm of the government lies in the executive. And so they understand that it is important that if you want to make real changes, the realest change would be to ensure UNC government takes office in 2020.
When is the last time you had a one-on-one, either on the phone or online or face-to-face with Mrs. Pasabi-Sessa?
March 1st, just before March 1st, because I had my private members day in the house. And so we discussed the issues relating to education and the education sector ahead of my private members beyond March West.
Is this length of time not speaking directly unusual?
I would not classify it as unusual. No.
So it's not a big deal. When you have business to speak, you speak business, and
Correct.
that's okay.
Correct.
How do you see this evolving in the UNC internal issue, and do you think this will have an overall impact? Or we asked the political analyst this yesterday, and he didn't think so, on the UNC's chances going to 2025.
I think how we handle ourselves now will either improve our chances in 2025 or be our detriment. And so it is really on the individuals participating to conduct themselves in a manner that they are aware that the population is looking on. And so therefore, like I did in the beginning, and I'll do again, it is possible to conduct your internal affairs. It is possible to get through this internal election and strengthen our organization. And really and truly, it can only be done if everyone is firmly committed to doing what is best for the organization as opposed to what is best for some individuals within the organization.
Do you think the country has a strong opposition now?
Pardon?
Do you think the country presently has a strong, with all that's happening, do you think the country can say it has a strong opposition?
I think that the country requires a strong opposition, and I think that
that's not the question.
No. What the longer we take to announce an internal election date, the more of a distraction this may seem to be. And so like I urged in the beginning, if we've acknowledged that it is constitutionally due. If we can dispense with the business in a respectful and responsible manner, we can then put all of our focus into the parliamentary spaces. And I think right now, because we have to end up in this type of back and forth, and that can be easily rectified. Or personalities really takes it upon themselves to focus on the issues. We can have a strong opposition, but right now we have a somewhat distracted opposition.
Do you think that is there a formal or informal aggregation of yourself and the so-called dissidents? Have you had any meetings together? Because that's some of the narrative that's out there, that you have this opposition group, but not opposition, but a splinter group in the opposition that's an informal or formal aggregation to challenge the mainstream opposition. Is that an accurate suggestion?
I would say that there are persons who have an interest in a direction for the UNC, a strengthened UNC, and conversations will take place to that regard, but certainly not anything to disrupt the functions of our opposition party. I mean, of the United National Congress. Those are two fundamentally different things, which is again why I took so much issue with the statements that were made on Sunday, that there is some sort of collusion to hurt the organization. Whatever conversation is taking place as part of how do we strengthen our structures. From party groups come up, how do you have a more community-based, inclusive approach to governance internally, because that is how you'll then structure your governance once elected into executive office at national pools. Do you take a top-down approach, or are you interested in building community by community and therefore building the organization or the nation? And so those kind of types of conversations are the things that are taking place, but certainly, absolutely, no conversation on undermining or dismantling, only conversations about building and strengthening.
Karen has a very good question I'll put up. Let's just say, for conversation's sake, should you end up on the next NATEX, what are the main changes you'd bring? It's a good question.
Yes. Like I just said, my approach to governance nationally and certainly within the party is that we can build our nation, we can build our organization community by community. So this refocusing on how do you get party groups, how do you get persons in small villages or large urban centers participating and discussing issues, and then that making its way up to the party arms. So the strengthening of all of our party arms, from party groups, constituency, executive, women's arm, youth arm, the Congress, all of these things were done to create a massive, inclusive Congress for Trinidad, for the UNC, for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. So I would begin by strengthening those, by recommitting ourselves to our membership, recommitting ourselves to the values of, politics that is grounded in our people, grounded in our human resources, because those are the reasons I entered politics. And so I think that is how we begin our transformation. We do it community by community. And so should I be on Inatex, I would remove this idea of a top-down approach, that what matters is who sits right all the way at the top. But what really matters is if our institution is strong and robust at all levels. And so that is the main thing that I will carry through from now until, I see it improving internally.
Anita Haynes, it's always an absolute pleasure to speak to you.
Yes. Well, thank you again for having
me. You bring and you have brought and you continue to bring a breath of fresh air to the politics of Trinidad and Tobago.
Can I ask you one more question before you leave, Anita?
Yes,
if it is that you're not selected by the screening committee, and so you're not going up for the UNC for the politics for 2025,
right. Yes.
Are you going to consider a run as an independent? Would you consider joining another party, or would that be it for you in politics?
I think there are a number of spaces for national development that don't include a seat in parliament. And so I'm sure I'll find myself in a space that will continue my advocacy. But I have committed to an organization. My job is to do best for the political party that is the United National Congress, improve that product. I don't think that, shopping around politically adds any real value. I think you either improve the space that you're in or get in a space to improve something. And so I think there are lots of spaces for national development, and I am sure I'll find myself in one of them.